Scary telling. I never meant for it to go this far. It started with a simple accident, one that left me disfigured and broken. The people in my town never looked at me the same way again. They whispered behind my back and made fun of my appearance. It was like I was a monster. The bullying became too much to bear. I felt like I was suffocating, drowning in their cruel words and stares. I tried to ignore them, but their words lingered in my mind, haunting me day and night. I knew I had to do something, anything, to make them see me differently. It started with a harmless idea, one that I thought would help me blend in with the crowd. I found a mask, one that covered my entire face, and wore it whenever I went out in public. At first, it worked. People treated me like a normal person, like I wasn't some kind of freak. But the mask was hot and uncomfortable, and it made me feel like I was suffocating all over again. That's when I got the idea. I would start collecting faces, ones that I could use to cover up my own. I started small, snatching faces from strangers who wouldn't be missed. But soon, it became an obsession. I couldn't stop myself. Every time I saw someone with a face that I liked, I would follow them, waiting for the right moment to strike. At first, I only took the faces of people who looked like me, people who had suffered similar accidents or injuries. But soon, that wasn't enough. I started taking faces from anyone and everyone. The thrill of the hunt, the rush of adrenaline that came with taking something that didn't belong to me, it was addictive. I didn't even care about the people whose faces I took anymore. They were just objects, things that I could use to cover up my own ugliness. And the more faces I collected, the more my appearance changed. I looked different every day, like some kind of chameleon. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I started breaking into people's homes, searching for faces that I could add to my collection. I didn't care about the risks, about the consequences of my actions. All I cared about was the next face, the next thrill. And then, one day, I was caught. The police found me in my apartment, surrounded by piles of faces. They arrested me, but it didn't matter. I was beyond redemption, beyond help. I was the face collector, a monster who had lost his way. Now, I sit here in my cell, waiting for the inevitable. The people in my town call me a freak, a monster, and they're right. But I'm not sorry for what I've done. In a way, I'm grateful. Because now, I look just like them, and they'll never be able to tell us apart. I was driving down the highway late at night, trying to make it to my new home before the sun rose. I had been on the road for hours and was exhausted, but I couldn't stop until I reached my destination. That's when I saw a car pull out in front of me, and I swerved to avoid it. I narrowly missed the other vehicle, but I crashed into a wall. I got out of my car, dazed and confused, and looked around to see what I had hit. To my surprise, there was nothing there but an empty field. I couldn't believe it. There was no wall, no obstruction, nothing. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but still, there was nothing there. I thought I must have been hallucinating from exhaustion. I got back in my car and continued on my way, feeling uneasy but not quite sure why. The next day, I went back to the spot where I had crashed, hoping to figure out what had happened. When I arrived, I saw that someone had put up a sign that said, "Welcome to your new home." It was strange and unnerving, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I decided to investigate further and walked into the field. As I walked, I began to feel as though I was being watched. I turned around several times but saw no one. The feeling only grew stronger, and I began to feel like I was being followed. I quickened my pace and finally reached the other side of the field. That's when I saw it, a dilapidated old house sitting on the edge of the property. It looked as though it hadn't been inhabited in years. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't resist the urge to explore. As I stepped inside, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls were covered in mold and mildew. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, and the shadows seemed to dance and shift around me. Suddenly, I heard a sound coming from upstairs. It sounded like someone was walking around. I froze, listening carefully. The footsteps grew louder and closer, and I realized with horror that someone or something was coming down the stairs. I stood frozen in terror as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, pale and thin, with long hair and sunken eyes. She looked at me with a cold, dead stare and said, "Welcome home." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The woman began to approach me, and I could feel her icy breath on my face. Suddenly, the lights went out, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground outside the house. I was covered in dirt and leaves, and my heart was racing. I couldn't remember what had happened, but I knew I had to get out of there. As I stumbled back to my car, I saw the sign again. "Welcome to your new home." But now, it felt like a warning, a threat. I knew I had to leave that place and never come back. I drove away as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I never looked back, but I could feel the woman's cold stare following me all the way home. I never thought a storm could be so terrifying. It was like something out of a horror movie. One minute, the sky was clear and the air was calm, and the next, it was chaos. Thunder boomed and lightning flashed, illuminating the sky with an eerie glow. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, rattling windows and shaking trees. I sat in my living room, watching the storm rage outside, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That's when I saw them. Strange creatures, flying among the dark clouds. They were like nothing I had ever seen before. They had long, thin bodies and wings that seemed to be made of some kind of transparent membrane. They had glowing red eyes and sharp, pointed teeth. I rubbed my eyes, thinking that I was hallucinating, but when I opened them again, the creatures were still there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Were these creatures from another world? Were they here to invade our town? I watched as the creatures swooped down from the clouds, their wings beating so fast that they were just a blur. They were heading straight for my house. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as they came closer and closer. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed with fear. The creatures were almost upon me when suddenly there was a blinding flash of light and a deafening boom. When I opened my eyes, the creatures were gone. The storm had passed, and the sun was shining once again. I stumbled outside, still shaking from the experience. I looked up at the sky, wondering if the creatures would return. But there was nothing there, just fluffy white clouds. I tried to tell people what I had seen, but no one believed me. They thought I was crazy, that I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew what I had seen. The creatures were real, and they were out there somewhere. Years passed, and I thought I had put the incident behind me. But then, one stormy night, I heard a strange noise outside my window. It was a sound I had heard before. I looked up, and there they were. The creatures from the storm. They were back, and they were hungry. I ran to my phone to call for help, but the line was dead. The creatures had cut it. I was alone, trapped in my house, with no way out. I could hear them scratching at the walls, trying to find a way in. I don't know how long I stayed there, huddled in the corner, listening to the creatures outside. It felt like hours. But finally, they were gone. The storm had passed, and the creatures had moved on. I never forgot that night. It still haunts me to this day. And every time I see a storm brewing on the horizon, I can't help but wonder if they'll come back. If they'll be waiting for me, just beyond the clouds. I had been working on my professional photography portfolio for weeks, carefully selecting the best shots to showcase my talent. I had taken hundreds of photos at various events, from weddings to corporate parties, and had finally narrowed it down to a select few. As I sorted through the chosen photos, I couldn't help but notice a strange coincidence. In every single one of them, there was a child in the background, staring directly at me. At first, I dismissed it as a fluke, a mere coincidence. But as I continued to look through the pictures, the child's gaze seemed to follow me, haunting me with its intensity. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But every time I looked at the pictures, the child's presence felt more and more real, like he was watching me from some unseen realm. The feeling only intensified when I showed the pictures to a friend, who immediately pointed out the child in each one, even though they were barely noticeable in the background. "It's like he's always there, watching you," my friend said, sending shivers down my spine. As the days went on, I found myself becoming more and more obsessed with the child in the pictures. I started to research the venues where the photos were taken, trying to find any information about a child who might have been present at each event. But there was no record of any child being there, not even a mention in the guest lists. It was like the child didn't exist, except in my photos. The situation became unbearable when I started to see the child in other places too, like in my dreams and in reflections of windows. His presence seemed to follow me wherever I went, like a dark cloud hanging over my head. But things took a terrifying turn when I started to notice that the child was not alone. In some of the photos, I could see other figures lurking in the background, their faces twisted into grotesque expressions of malice and hatred. I knew then that I had to get rid of the photos, to destroy them before they consumed me entirely. But every time I tried to delete them, I found myself unable to do so, like some invisible force was stopping me. In the end, I locked the photos away in a drawer, hoping that by hiding them from sight, I could also hide them from the child's watchful eyes. But every time I open that drawer, I can feel his gaze on me, piercing through my soul like a knife. And I know then that I will never be free from his haunting presence, no matter how hard I try to escape it. I woke up to the sound of pounding on my front door. I stumbled out of bed, still groggy from sleep, and peered through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on my porch, their expressions grim. "Open up, Mr. Johnson," one of them shouted. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing. What had I done? Was I in trouble for something? I couldn't think of anything I'd done wrong, but that didn't mean much. I slowly opened the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mr. Johnson, you are under arrest for the murders of 6 people, one of the officers said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had never been in trouble with the law before. I tried to protest, to tell them they had the wrong guy, but they didn't listen. They read me my rights and took me away. I spent the next few days in a daze, barely able to process what was happening. They had video footage of me leaving the latest victim's house, covered in blood. But I wasn't even in town that week. I was on a business trip in another state. How could they think it was me? But the evidence was overwhelming. They found my fingerprints on the murder weapon, and witnesses placed me near the scene of several of the crimes. I couldn't explain it. I didn't even know the victims. I was put on trial, and the media descended on the town. They dubbed me the serial killer next door, and the trial was a circus. The evidence against me was strong, but I knew I was innocent. I just had to find a way to prove it. One night, as I lay in my cell, I had an epiphany. I remembered a neighbor who had been acting strangely in the days leading up to the first murder. He was always staring at me through his window, and I had caught him going through my garbage a few times. I had never thought much of it, but now it all seemed suspicious. I contacted my lawyer and told him about my theory. He was skeptical at first, but we started looking into it. We found out that the neighbor had a history of mental illness and had been hospitalized several times. He had been released from the hospital just before the murders began. We dug deeper and found out that the neighbor had a motive for the killings. He had been angry with the victims for some perceived slight, and he had fixated on me as a target for his anger. He had even used my DNA and fingerprints to frame me for the murders. We presented our evidence in court, and the case against me fell apart. The neighbor was arrested, and I was exonerated. The media moved on to the next sensational story, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. But the experience changed me. I had always believed in the justice system, in the idea that the truth would always come out in the end. But now I knew that sometimes the truth was hard to find, and that innocent people could be caught up in a system that was supposed to protect them. I was grateful to be free, but I knew that I would never be the same again.